Brothers and sisters, when we're having a legislative conference for trade unionists, such as this one is, and you want to invite a speaker who's been in the thick of labor's legislative battles for 30 years or more, there's just one man that you think of. And when you look for a speaker who is as eloquent and inspirational as he is intelligent and informed, there's one man that you think of. And when you want to invite one of the busiest men in Washington and know that he's seldom too busy to meet with his friends in the trade union movement, there's one man that you think of. And especially when you need someone who can come on this early in the morning and rouse up, fire up, and wake up a bunch of half-hung-over auto workers and machinists, there's one man you think of. And I guess all of you know there's only one guy in Washington who fits that particular description, and that's the man who's with us right now, the one and only Senator Hubert Humphrey.
Good morning. Keep it up, boys. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Well, now I'm awake. I thank you very much for making that warm and friendly welcome. And Bill, thank you for presenting to me, to the audience, and thank you for lying a little bit about me at this early hour. I've always said that when you're going to be introduced, if you have a choice, you ought to get a good friend. Because if you get a good friend, he will lie a little for you, you know? And this morning, he said all the right things. Now, you're lucky today. I'll tell you why. First of all, I have to get out of here at a precise hour. Otherwise, I just have to stay and talk to you for quite a little while, you know? And I have a man sitting down here alongside of me from my staff that's reminding me this morning that I am to chair the Joint Economic Committee hearing, and we're having the President's Council of Economic Advisors coming over to talk to us about their poison. And I thought we'd get up there and kind of analyze the prescription that they have for the American economy. I want to tell you something. If you folks had to depend on getting over the economic influenza from these doctors that are going to come up and see me, you ought to go see the mortician, because they're not going to get cured. But I want to get right down to business. We're old friends. I lost my button that said I was looking for it, ban the pact. I want the boys and gals to know that. Where is that thing? Well, anyway, I've been grilled this morning. I've had the IAM and the UAW work me over. I want to thank the UAW, at least they fed me. But the boys from back home have been asked me certain questions and were grading me all the way along the line, anywhere from a spectrum of 1 to 5, and I haven't got my grade yet. But we've had a good meeting. Thank you for coming to Washington. Thank you for being here to talk to the members of Congress. I know that many of you were on Capitol Hill yesterday when important votes were taking place over in the House of Representatives. And we're going to override that presidential veto of the Health, Education, and Welfare Act. I think we ought to get it clear, and the message needs to be brought to every member of Congress, that this government was not designed to have government by veto. And that's what's been going on in this country. We've got a man in the White House, nice, decent fellow to be sure, but a man who insists on using his presidential veto power to hold back what is the expressed will of the elected representatives of the people in the Congress of the United States. We got to stop that. Today I want to talk to you about the basic problems that afflict our country and some of the things that we can do about it. Now, I'm going to tell you right from the beginning, I don't say that I, Hubert Humphrey, or anyone else has instant miracle cures. I don't think you expect that. But I think that you expect us to do our job. I think you expect us to be on the job. I think you expect us to remember who we're here to represent. And sometimes I feel that those who have put their hand on the Bible and taken the oath of office have forgotten that the Constitution of the United States speaks of we the people, not just some of the people. It speaks of the great mass of the American people. And that's the way you justify government. The real moral test of government is what it does for those who are in the dawn of life, our children, what it does for those who are in the shadows of life, our unfortunate, our needy, our sick, our handicapped, and what it does for those who are in the twilight of life, our elderly. And you add to that the other thing that Americans need, and that's an opportunity to be able to have gainful employment, to live in a community that is safe, and to have an opportunity to rear a family in decent surroundings. Now, that's not asking too much. That isn't asking that somehow or another the government of the United States or the government of your state just fill your bank account. It's only asking that we try to use the instruments of government to see to it that you have a chance, as the founding fathers said in the Declaration of Independence, for the pursuit of happiness. No one ever can guarantee you that you're going to be happy. No one can guarantee that everything's going to come out all right. But we have a right at least to have a government that thinks of us as people so that the impediments, the roadblocks are somewhat removed so that we can travel down that road of seeking our way of happiness and of the fulfillment of our life. Now, the President of the United States gives a State of the Union message before every session of Congress. He just gave us one. I want to tell you something. If that's the State of the Union, I hope it isn't yours. But the state of your union and your unions, these two great organizations, depends in a large measure upon the state of the federal union. And that Constitution calls for us to build a more perfect union. That's the first phrase in the Constitution. We the people, in order to form a more perfect union. That's where it starts. And that's what the State of the Union address ought to be all about. How do we make a better balanced America? How do we make it a better America? How do we have an America that opens up its doors for everybody? And this administration has refused to think in those terms. Oh, we even got some Democrats these days running around denying that the New Deal or the Fair Deal or the New Frontier or the Great Society, running around denying their own heritage. Well, now let me tell you something. I don't say that everything that Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman and John Fitzgerald Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson tried to do, I don't say it was perfect. But I'll say this, that when Franklin Roosevelt said to my parents, all you have to fear is fear itself. And when he said to my parents, if you're going to lose your home, you write to me and I'll do something about it. And when Harry Truman took them all on and said he was going to run this country and going to run it for the people, and when John Kennedy said, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country, and when Lyndon Johnson said, we shall overcome, that's my kind of politics. I'm the last person to say that every program was perfect. They were all experiments, but they were all designed to try to get at problems. And as Roosevelt once said, we will experiment. We will try. If it doesn't work, we'll frankly say so, and we'll try again, but above all else, we must try and try and try. And what's this crowd done? They look around and see millions of people unemployed. They see workers' income literally destroyed. They see senior citizens with a pitiful small pension. They see our kids, I hope they do at least, many of our young people in the ghettos are going to rot. They see a housing program in this country destroyed. They sit back and say, well, you know, that's the market. That's the market. That's the way it works. John Kennedy once said that this election is not a choice between two candidates. Not even a choice between two parties. It's a choice between the comfortable and the concerned. Some people are very comfortable, and some of us are concerned. And I'm here to tell you that the sense of justice that this country ought to have requires that there be better treatment for the people who are the unfortunate victims of economic policies pursued by a government that has forgotten that the real strength of this nation is in its people. I was lucky as a young man. My father was my teacher. We were a small town business out in South Dakota. And my dad told me one time, he said, "Son, we're no more prosperous than the people that come through that front door. If they haven't got it, we can't get it." I've never forgotten it. And that's the truth. If the people haven't got the money, they can't buy the car. If the people don't have the money, they can't build a home. And then if you stack the deck on them with high interest and tight credit, there's no chance for them to either buy a car or to build a home. We've got to start to think of where the wealth of this country really is, or where it should be. The wealth of this country has got to be in the hands of the American people, not just some of the people, but the American people. Now let's take a look. What's the twin evils that's been afflicting us? Inflation and recession. Now, we never had both of them at the same time before, I want to be honest with you. Sometimes we've had inflation, but no recession. Sometimes we've had recession, but surely no inflation. And this time we got both diseases at once. I'll tell you, it's just like kind of getting pneumonia and paralysis at the same time. And we didn't have many economic doctors that knew what to do. So we should have been experimenting instead of waiting to see who could survive, like the Black Plague in Europe of centuries ago. And that's what the administration's been doing. Their cure has been to see who will survive. They saw the fever of inflation. They said, now there's a good way to clear that up. Bleed the patient. Back in the 17th and 18th century, there used to be doctors. They were called bleeders. The old barber pole that you see, that was the sign of the doctor of the 18th century, the 1700s. He was a bleeder. George Washington had a fever. They bled him and he died. That's a fact. That's a historical fact. I want to tell you something. They ought to put a barber pole out in front of the White House. They've been bleeding this country. Now, what I've said to you, I've said to the Council of Economic Advisors, the President's top economists. I don't have two speeches. They're going to get another dose of it at 10 o'clock this morning, because I'm going to be right up there after them again. Right after them again. Yes, my friends, this administration has said the problem is inflation, and the only way to cure it, some people have got to die. Economically, I speak. Some people have got to be sacrificed on the altar of their so-called market economy. So they say, well, it's too bad that we have to have 8%, 9%, 10% unemployment, and they fuzz the figures. Today they tell you that the unemployment rate is 8.3. Well, it's been like that for months. It was up to over 9% officially. The honest unemployment rate is about 11% nationally. Because a lot of people are working part-time that want to work full-time. A lot of people have dropped out of the employment market because they couldn't get a job. And the unemployment rate amongst young people in our center cities is as high as 35 and 40%. They're rotting. Many of these young people will never have a job in their lives. They'll learn how to live on the shadow economy. They'll learn how to live by illegal methods. And our government is permitting itself to close its eyes to this. These general averages of unemployment, what does that mean? That's like trying to find the common man. That's a good phrase, but there isn't anybody that's that common. Everybody is different, from their fingerprints to their personalities, to their size and their shape. I was up in Rhode Island here the other day. Unemployment's 12.2. You go to New York City, it's 12 or 13%. You go out to Los Angeles, 11 or 12%. Unemployment is specific, and in some areas it's high, ungodly high. In some areas it's not so high, but they average it out. and it sort of makes it look good. The point that I seek to make is that the waste of human resources in this country is literally a national crime. It doesn't need to happen. Other societies have been able to do better. When I hear the spokesman of the administration say, well, if you have full employment, you're going to have inflation. Well, listen there, friends. In the Federal Republic of Germany, up until a year ago, they had full employment, less than 2% unemployed, and half the rate of our inflation. It just doesn't add up. The real truth is that we've had people in charge in this country that are trying to condition you to accept high unemployment rates as long as you got a job, to forget your brother and your sister, to forget your neighbor. But I'm here to tell you, my fellow Americans, that when we forget some segment in this economy, we pay and pay and pay in 1,001 different ways. You can't have an 8-cylinder car and run on 6 with somebody got his foot on the brake and expect to make much progress. That's what's going on. Well, dear friends, in 1969, January, we had 3.6 average unemployment, less than 4%. You had 4.5% inflation. Today, your average rate of inflation is about 9%, and your average rate of unemployment is 8.5%. Well, what's been the real cost of unemployment and recession? God only knows what the cost has been of inflation, which is a hidden tax on your income. Inflation just corrodes it. It eats it up. It's like salt water chewing up the metal. Well, what about the cost of recession? Because everybody's talking about the cost these days. Whenever you go up to Congress and you talk to somebody up there, they're going to say, well, if we do what you want to do, it's going to cost too much. This reminds me of the person that goes to the doctor, gets a prescription, and he looks at the price of the prescription rather than the price of the disease. And keep that in mind. We got a lot of people today that are looking at the cost of the prescription to get the cure rather than looking at the cost of the disease that is destroying us or at least weakening us. Good medicine costs money, but health is a tremendous asset, invaluable. Sickness, physical or economic, is more costly than health, physical or economic. And we have to look at the alternatives that we have. And I want to repeat it again. I'm sure that many of you have talked to your members of Congress, and you have talked to a number of people in the government. And every time you talk to them, they say, well, if you have full employment, it's going to cost us so much. Well, I read the other day, I had a man on the TV show Sunday. Some of you may have seen it. He came on up and said, look, Mr. Humphrey, your bill for full employment will cost $35 billion. $35 billion to put everybody back to work. And I said, well, I'm not going to argue about the figure, even though, quite frankly, I think that is not the accurate figure. But I said, all right, the cost last year of unemployment to the Treasury of the United States was $40 billion. $40 billion. And if I could trade that $40 billion cost that we paid out in food stamps and welfare and unemployment compensation for a $35 billion cost to have every American have a good job at a fair wage, I'd make that deal any day. Did anybody think what it was going to cost when we had to fight a war? Not a bit. Pour it in. But when we fight a war against recession, somebody wants to put up the white flag, or somebody wants to say, hey, we can't afford to pass the ammunition. Since 1972, there's only been one job made available for every 4 people that sought a job. That's been your problem. One job for every 4. During the days, just take you the days of Kennedy and Johnson, 13 million new jobs were added. 13 million. And since 1969, 4 million. That's the problem. The economy hasn't grown. Yet all the promises, my gosh, this GOP crowd, they got more promises out here than they've gotten in any book that's ever been written. Just listen to what they've tried to sell you all the years, and they're continuing to do it. Number one, balanced budget. They got everybody believing that they're for a balanced budget. They've had more unbalanced budget than any administration since World War II when we were fighting for our lives. They've increased the public debt $200 billion. The cost and interest increase this year, 1 year, is $6.5 billion. But they go around as pious looking and say, balanced budget, like it's holy writ. If they believe it, then they are admitting their total incompetence because they got the worst unbalanced budgets it's ever had. Number two, you remember how they go around and they're on everybody's back that's on welfare. They believe in the work ethic. You know, they say, we believe in work. They got more people unemployed than any time since the Great Depression. They believe in the stable dollar. That's another thing they talk over the radio and the television. They've devalued your dollar twice internationally, and they've had inflation that has eroded your dollar until the day your worker's salary take-home pay is just what it was 10 years ago. That's what they've done to your dollar. Oh, they say we believe in good government. They've had more mismanagement of this government and more outright corruption than any time since Grant and Harding. So, my dear friends, don't let them fool you. But I'm here to tell you that you're going to have an avalanche of propaganda. The President of the United States and his crew are going to try to fasten on people like Hubert, Humphrey, and your friends all of the evils of our society. We're the spenders. We're the people that waste, they say. Well, let me tell you about waste, first of all. You've got to run this country. Somebody's got to be in charge. This crowd hasn't been running the country. They've been running around the country. They've either gone to China or to Russia, or they've been running after Ronald Reagan. Somebody has to be in charge of the store. That means cabinet meetings. Or they say the bureaucracy. Well, whose is it? It's theirs. They say these rules and regulations are destroying everybody, but who wrote them? They did. These weren't discovered in a Dead Sea Scroll in the Sinai Desert. There's none of these rules and regulations in the Bible or in the Constitution. The same people that wrote them can erase them if they're needed to be done, if somebody's in charge. But if all you're trying to do is to make a big propaganda push and get the American people to believe that the government is wrong, that the policies that some people tried to pursue were wrong, and that all that you got to do is get the government away from you, then you're going to be in serious trouble. Now, I don't happen to believe that big government is the answer. I think the government that works is the answer. That's what counts. I don't believe that big government is what we're for. I think it's government that serves the people, that's efficient, is what we're for. We've got a big Department of Housing. Last year, the Congress made available funds for 400,000 housing units, and this crowd got 1,500 starts. That's what they did. This year, the president says he's going to provide for 500,000 housing units, and I'm here to tell you something, friends. If the American Indian had to wait for HUD to get a loan to build a teepee, they'd still be walking. They'd never had a chance to sleep. So the cost of unemployment since 1969, 57 million Americans have been unemployed at one time or another. 57 million. That's 1/4 of better than our total population. In the last 2 years, the cost of this recession has been $300 billion in lost income. It's been over $50 billion in lost federal revenues. And let me give you a figure that ought to blow your hat off. Your own government admits this, that between 1974 and 1980, the cost of the recession will be $1.5 trillion in lost production, lost income, lost revenues, money that was flushed down the toilet and out into the Potomac. Nobody ever touched it. $1.5 trillion. That is $7,000 per every man, woman, and child. That's $28,000 for a family of four that you've had to pay to keep this bunch of mismanagers in charge of this government. I tell you, that's too damn expensive. Get rid of them. But dear friends, it isn't as if everybody has had trouble. The top 20% of the income people of this country have never had it so good. One thing I'll say about my Republican friends over there, they take care of their friends. The trouble is, you're not one of them. Oh, yes. They were doing really good with all the loopholes, with all the profits in the banking industry. They were taking care of their friends. Interest rates, the highest that they've been since the Civil War. Now, dear friends, who announces the interest rates? The largest banks. And they just announce it, and that's what you pay. You get by just announcing what the wage is going to be? You got to negotiate. And you're lucky if you come out so that you, on a 3-year contract, I've often said on a 3-year contract, the first year you make up for what you lost, the second year you hold even, and the third year you start losing again. That's right. You talk about price fixing. There's no competition on these interest rates. And the Federal Reserve Board is all a part of the whole mishmash. Federal Reserve Board, it controls the credit, controls the rate of money supply, which has a great deal to do about the availability of credit and interest rates. There hasn't been a labor man on that Federal Reserve Board since I don't know when. And I tried to tell you good folks back in 1968 that when you elect a president, you don't just elect somebody in there to have dinner in the stateroom of the White House. You elect judges. You elect agency heads. You elect the Federal Reserve Board. You elect all the great centers of power in this country. And the Federal Reserve Board today has 5 bankers and 2 professors. Now, I'm not against bankers. I think they're entitled to be on the Federal Reserve Board, but they ought not to own it. That's a conflict of interest. And you know it and I know it. So when they set the interest rates, they obviously set it from a point of view that's very close to them. Why isn't there a manufacturer on that board? Why isn't there a labor representative on that board? Why isn't there an agriculturalist on that board? All of these are important, but they got it locked up. And if you folks don't do something to shake it up and demand some changes, it's going to stay that way. All I can do for you is to point out what I know after some 26 years living in this city. And I tell you, the game is rigged against you. And until you're ready to make the changes in elections and also know what you're electing, and don't let them slip off the hook. Don't let them just look at you and say, look at my white teeth. This country doesn't need charisma as much as it needs character. And you know I'm telling you the truth. We got all this new kind of politics, charisma, image, PR, baloney. What this country needs is character, substance, and performance. And that's what you need to take care of your needs. What happened to the housing industry of this country? There are only 15% of the American people today can afford to buy a home. Now listen, friends, we need housing policy in America. If we're going to worship the family, and we do, we say we do at least, and you and I know that's a basic institution. It's pretty hard to have family life without a place in which to live. And everybody ought to have a chance to own his home as a part of the American tradition, or at least to have a home that he can live in that's fit to live in. And that goes for all kinds of people. There's no need of people living in filth and degradation in this society. But what happens today with the high interest rates and the tight money and the mortgage money? Most of our young people can't afford one. So our housing production today is 1 million less units than it was 8 years ago. Million less. Ridiculous. We loan money to Brazil, to the Soviet Union. We loan money all over the world under the Export-Import Bank at 6 and 7%. Now, I'm not against that because that helps American industry and helps your jobs. I don't oppose that. But I want to tell you something, that if we can loan money under the Export-Import Bank, and if we can loan money through the World Bank to everybody, friend and foe alike, cheaper than we loan money at home, something's wrong. I tell you that if we can loan money to them, we can loan it to us. We own 70% of all the assets of the World Bank. And that World Bank makes available money all over the world for a whole lot less than New York City can borrow it, or Milwaukee, or Minneapolis. The time to build America's strength is now, and the place you start it is to put things back together right back here in the United States of America. That's where you start it. Now, people say, well, Humphrey, you're too tough on the president. No, I'm not at all. He and I came to Congress at the same time, and I'm not personal. I'll be honest with you, I get along with him very well, and personally, we're friends. And as I've said to other audiences, he's a good man, decent man. But I want to tell you something, so's my Uncle Fred, but he ought not to be president of the United States. You know, they just got everything screwed up, that's all. And there's a reason for it. Now, you heard what President Johnson used to say about the incumbent in the White House. And I'll be honest with you, I thought that was a little too mean, little unkind and unfair about chewing gum and all that business and no helmet when you played football. All that's the way Lyndon Johnson would go after somebody once in a while. That was wrong, because that's not even the problem. It really isn't. I'll tell you what the problem is. You just remember, my dear friend, the president, played on the University of Michigan football team when he played against the great Golden Gophers back in the days of Bernie Bierman when we were good. And what position did he play? He played center. Now, when you're playing center, you're leaning over, you know, and you're looking through your legs and everything is upside down. So, dear friends, what ought to be up is down. What ought to be down is up, and he thinks it's right. Prices ought to be down, and they're up. Employment ought to be up, and it's down. He doesn't know he's wrong. After you've been in that position long enough, it looks normal. So you and I have got to straighten them out. Now, let me give you a more serious note. I've talked to you about the economic costs of recession and unemployment. That's terrible. It is an ungodly cost. But the worst cost is when somebody's told they're not needed over a long period of time. That destroys people, and it also promotes a kind of cynicism and frustration and bitterness that a country like ours cannot long endure. But the policies of these modern free market buccaneers, and that's what they are because they just talk about the free market all the time, have torn the fabric of our society. And I want to read to you some information that has been prepared now by experts that have been studying this matter for years, that the Joint Economic Committee is making available to the public. Just let me show you a few things that have happened, and much of it is related to our unemployment. Since 1969, the crime rate has risen 30%, and amongst juveniles, it's doubled. I mean, amongst young people. That's where the big crime rate is today. The number of murders has leaped 50%. The number of robberies has risen 68%. The number of burglaries has soared 84%. Your family has 1 in 6 chances of being victimized by a burglary or a theft this year. Now, I don't say that economics is all the cause of this, but it contributes. And I can show you studies that have been made that show that as the unemployment rate goes up, the crime rate goes up. It just follows just like that. And dear friends, that's not all. But other things happen. Mental illness alcoholism, drug abuse, incredible things that will plague us for years to come. Unemployment and recession is not only an economic disaster, it's a social disaster for hundreds of thousands of people. And yet when the president comes to us with his budget, as he does, what he gave us? Well, I thought that the twin evils were inflation and unemployment, and he doesn't do a thing about either one of them. He picked a figure out of the air, $395 billion, said that ought to sell to the American people if we can still push it around. And he forgot as to whether or not that budget was targeted in on the problems. Didn't pay any attention to it at all. What does that budget do? Well, that budget, number one, reduces the manpower programs and the job programs 27%. That budget does away with 450,000 people's unemployment compensation. That budget does away with 230,000 public service jobs. That budget does away with 170,000 summer jobs for kids that are going to be running our streets this summer. That budget reduces education by 11%, health care by over 6%. That budget reduces the school lunch program and the nutrition program for our senior citizens by $1 billion. And there are other things that it does to us that are absolutely incredible. That budget raises Social Security taxes at a time when it means that the employer will have to pay out more to put a man to work, a man or a woman on a job, and it means that the employees will have an additional tax on them. That budget provides two increases. Two increases. They're going to build 4 federal penitentiaries. That's the Public Works program. That's right. The president announced we're going to build, in his State of the Union message, he said there'll be no health insurance, but we'll build 4 federal penitentiaries. Thanks for nothing, huh? 4 federal penitentiaries and a 15% increase in the Pentagon. That means that this year we'll spend $30 billion for new weapons systems instead of $21 billion. But in the meantime, we're going to cut back on every program that means anything to help the distressed people of this country and to help this economy get back on its feet. Now look, I'm not for just dishing out the goodies. I want to put people to work. I think people do not want a welfare check. I think they want a paycheck. I think people want jobs. Oh, then they tell me, but they won't work. Well, I'm here to tell you they will. I was out in California recently holding a joint economic committee hearing, and there was one job open in the city hall for an elevator maintenance operator. You know how many people were there for that job? By 4:30 in the morning, 300, and by 7 o'clock, 400, and they had a riot for one job. They opened up 2,200 public service jobs, and 22,000 people turned up. And what are public service jobs? Little or nothing, $8,000 a year, $9,000 a year. People want to work. And you and I have got to see this country gets back to work. I want the private economy to hire most everybody, but some people don't fit in right away. And there are things to do in America. I'm for willing to give private industry all kinds of incentive to put people to work. I'll go the extra mile, but there'll still be some people that can't fit into those slots. Then there are things to do. Our forests are 15 years behind in tree planting. Our parks are crowded. Our railroad system is falling apart. There are cities that need to be cleaned up. And instead of just dishing out checks, food stamps, and welfare that people really don't want, but it's all they can get, let's give them a chance to do something gainful and constructive with a fair wage under decent working conditions to build and construct America. So you got a budget that does nothing for either public or private jobs. You got a budget that the president admits will increase inflation. And they call that a policy for America. Dear friends, that's no policy. That's the road to continued trouble. Oh, I know there's going to be a slow recovery this year. I know that. And that's good. I know that they're going to sell more cars, and thank God. I know that we're going to do a little better in all of our areas of our economy, and for this I'm eternally grateful. That's what we call recovery, when bank profits are up, when corporate profits are up, and gross national product is up. But what about the people's recovery? What about the millions of Americans across this land that will see no recovery? What about the constant fear that you may lose your job? What about the fact that inflation still continues to erode your income? And then they'll tell you, but Mr. Humphrey, if we do what you say, there'll be more inflation. And I say that's a lie. Isn't it interesting that at the time that the unemployment rate dropped 1%, from 9.3 to 8.3, the inflation rate dropped 3%. When people went back to work, when they produced, when the tools of our factories were better used, unit production cost goes down. If we could put America back to work, if we could get that 25% of our plant capacity today that's idle, if we could get 15% of that back to work, we would have less inflation and less costs. Every 1% of unemployment costs the taxpayers of this country $16 billion. Every 1%. Don't you forget that fact. If we can reduce unemployment in this country by 4%, we've got a budget surplus. And we'll start to cut back on the costs of government, and we'll start to reduce our public debt. The answer is not to go around chopping people down, but the answer is to build America up. We need in this country, dear, never mind, just a minute. We need in this country a rejuvenation of our faith in ourselves, and we the people. I want you to take a hold of things. I want you to quiz every candidate. And I want you to ask them, where do they stand? Where do they stand on health insurance? This man says he's opposed to it. I'm for it. And I'm here to tell you, I know it's costly, but it's more costly to be sick. We spent $120 billion last year on health care and didn't get much of it. We need to look ahead to the day that we have comprehensive health insurance in this land for every member of our family, every one. I want you to ask the candidates that run for office, what are you going to do about housing? What kind of a rate of interest do you think we ought to pay? Hubert Humphrey is for a housing bank that will see to it that nobody has to pay over 6 or 7% to get a mortgage, and that we have a chance to have mortgage money in this country. And don't tell me we can't do it, because we do it. We finance people all over the world at that. I want you to ask candidates, how are you going to put people back to work? I want emergency public works projects that we can turn off and on according to the rate of unemployment. We've got things to do, cities that are destroyed, streets that are no good, parks that need to be cleaned up. We have things to do in America. And I'll tell you, dear friends, it's a damn shame that we're not busy getting it done, and you know it. This country has a confidence crisis, they say. It isn't just that. It's a spiritual crisis. We have people telling us today we can't do this. Every time we suggest something, somebody says no. Every time we propose something, somebody says it costs too much. Every time we want to go someplace, they say, don't try that route. America has lost what is a part of its real heritage. As we celebrate our bicentennial, dear fellow Americans, there are three things that stand out in our history. Number one, the pioneer spirit. Try, dare, adventure. The second is optimism. That's the way we've won our struggles. We've never believed that they could roll us over. We've never believed that we couldn't do what needed to be done. We've always believed we could do what had to be done. We conquered a continent. We opened up the vast expanse of this nation. We won World War II. We've done great things. And the other thing was live and let live. Work together as a people. We're building, hopefully in this country, a better society. Hopefully we can learn to work together and play together and live together. We die together. Why not the other things? These are things that we've stood for in America. And I want to have leadership that'll tell us once again that we can do it. I want leadership in the White House and in Congress that doesn't keep repeating no, no. And that's what they're saying. They're saying, America, no. Hubert Humphrey says, America, go. And ladies and gentlemen, that's what we need to do. Thank you. Go on. Good to see you.